Imagine living in a world of fear, a world of oppression, where your opinion does not matter in any way, shape, or form. Imagine living in a world where every 6 minutes a rape gets reported, and that 4 out of 5 rapes aren't even reported, meaning every minute there is an actual rape. This is the reality we live in today. Reality, direct reality, for many women around the world. My name is Omar Rashid. Welcome to my ISU Culminating. Today, I'll be explaining to you and informing you on the struggles of millions and millions and billions of women around the world today. Let's begin. Now, first we have to look at the brief summaries of the 2 books I've chosen. Now, the first book is called Women at Point Zero, made by Nawal al-Saadawi. She is a well-known Egyptian author, and in her time at Kantar prison, she met with a character named Firdius. Now, Firdius is the main character in the story, and the whole book is about her life. Now, Firdius was born into poverty in Egypt, and also lived through many years of oppressive and unequal experiences. Now, this shaped her to become who she is today, finally a free woman, a woman in prison. However, there's much more to the story. Through this, she became a sex worker, and eventually, she had millions and millions of actual struggles in her actual lifetime, in which Nawal Saadawi extensively describes. Now, the main themes of this book is pervasive sexism and oppression, directly described by Firdius and her experiences. Also, fear and survival, which shaped her to become a sex worker, unfortunately. And also, self-worth and ownership, in which she knew her own value, finally, now in prison. Now, my second book is by Rebecca Solnit. The title is Men Explain Things to Me. And there is no real main character. This book was set up by Rebecca Solnit of 7 different essays, basically. Each essay is a specific scenario in which she has experienced. Now, this book takes each characters in all these stories and puts it into one huge book known as Men Explain Things to Me. It's a very creative concept. Now, this book is basically about women being victims from bias from the government and from society. Also explains the women's disadvantages and tragedies, and also people's view on it. This is more a society-based thing caused by a governmental issue. Also, this book is the idea that men know everything, hence the title, Men Explain Things to Me. Now, the main themes of this book would be issues of credibility, how some people disregard women, also the silencing and disappearing of women. This is a very violent thing, and also the relationship between classism and sexism. And this applies to both books. Many of these things actually apply to both books, but this is very direct. Now, moving on, we have society's perception of women. Now, the first quote I choose is from Nawal al-Saadawi from Women at Point Zero, where she states, "She replied that it was precisely men well versed in religion who beat their wives. The precepts of religion permitted such punishment. A virtuous woman who was not supposed to complain about her husband. Her duty was perfect obedience." Now, in this regard, the issue is that many people in Egypt at that time, which is in the 1970s and 1960s, had a misconception of religion. Now, society, which was heavily shaped by, unfortunately, religious extremist groups, misinterpreted the information for all of the citizens. Now, the 3 main religions being Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, all have misinterpretations. The actual religion, for example, of Islam, men are not actually permitted to beat their wives, only in case of an emergency, directly listed such as killing of their own child, in which the man is allowed to intervene. And there's obviously many rules to that. The issue in the society at that time was men all abused this permission given by the religion itself. Now, moving on to the second quote we have from Men Explain Things to Me, Rebecca Solnit states, "So many men murder their partners and former partners that we have well over 1,000 homicides of that kind a year, measuring that every 3 years the death toll tops 9/11's casualties, though no one declares a war on these particular kinds of terrors." Now, she worded this very, very carefully, this last part here, as she basically shows that, look, there are 2 scenarios. one of 9/11, and the homicides caused from men murdering their partners. Now, she basically explains how one is seen as a terrorism act and is a terror act, and the other one is just seen as, oh no, it's an issue. And she basically further elaborates and how society does not actually see things how they should be seen. The reactions of certain people, men and women, don't actually, they don't mesh, they only clash. And although women do support women more than men, society in general is really pressured and oppressed by the government, which is the next point that we'll be talking about. Now, government's perception of women. So the first quote is sort of like explaining what is the reality versus what should be happening. The first quote by Noel Saadawi in Women at Point Zero, she states, "Democracy is not just a freedom to criticize the government or head of state or to hold parliamentary elections." Here, she basically says what it is right now. True democracy obtains only when the people, women, men, young people, children, have the ability to change the system of industrial capitalism that has oppressed them since the earliest days of slavery. Here she basically describes how it's been going on for so long. She continues saying, a system based on class division, patriarchy, and military might. A hierarchical system that subjugates people merely because they are born poor or female or dark-skinned. This kind of relates to the classism and sexism on Men Explain Things to Me. But as I said, they all kind of are about the same thing. Now, Noel Saadawi here basically explains how due to different scenarios, government would judge people. Now, certain examples would be how rich, white, powerful men, if they do something wrong, then they have excuses and stuff like that. And she basically explains how this is not acceptable. That's the first part. Second part being that women and the rape culture and other beating of their men beating of their wives, certain things like that is not acceptable then, and it shouldn't be acceptable now. And she basically says that since the earliest days of slavery, that this has been going on for so long, and that it is completely unacceptable for the government to oppress people in such a way. Now, moving on, we have the second quote by Rebecca Solnit in Men Explain Things to Me. She states, throughout much of history in the West, the laws defining marriage made the husband essentially the owner of the wife, possession. Now, here she also continues, making it even more simpler. She states, men is the boss, while the woman is the slave. Now, the fact that this is literally legal, and considering the two times of these two books, not much has changed. You can tell that the government has a genuine influence that nobody can actually do anything about. Now, Women at Point Zero, the book was made in Egypt by an Egyptian author in 1975. Men Explain Things to Me, however, was made in 2014, meaning over 40 years or so time, for 50 years or so time, there hasn't been that much of a difference. There has not been a huge change. The government is still on power, has power to do anything, and is unfortunately against women's rights. Here, Rebecca Solnit exposes everything and states that this is simply not acceptable. Now, moving on, we have women's perception of women. Here, we basically talk about how women would help each other. This is women empowerment directly from a woman. Now, in Women at Point Zero, El Saadawi states, "Yet not for a single moment did I have any doubts about my own integrity and honor as a woman." Now here, the beautiful thing about this is, this quote from Ferdius, by the way, this is Ferdius is saying, came after a complete dialogue with a woman she met named Sharifa, which basically, when she was at her lowest point, when she was literally a woman at Point Zero, she met a woman which helped her after many faces of oppression and disrespect from men. She never knew who she was. She never claimed her body as her own. And basically, Sharifa empowered her, saying, "You have to be harder than life." Also on page 183. Now, in this, Noel Saadawi basically shows that the only person who has a woman's back is a woman herself. and this was made in 1975. Here we could see a more updated version from Rebecca Solnit's Men Explain Things to Me. Hopefully we would see a possible improvement. In here, Men Explain Things to Me, Rebecca Solnit states, "We have an abundance of rape and violence against women in this country and on this earth, though it's almost never treated as a civil rights or human rights issue or a crisis or even a pattern. Violence doesn't have a race, a class, a religion, or a nationality, but it does have a gender." Now, excuse me, Rebecca Solnit here explains how this has been going on for so long, and like the 9/11 example, people don't actually see this the way it should be. Here Rebecca basically says that the only people who have women's support is women, but it shouldn't be that way. It should not be that way. It should be everybody uniting completely as one in order to beat the system, in order to kind of bring equality and equity when needed as much as possible. Rebecca Solnit will continue to do great things, as she's actually inspired me to create an activist group on this regard. Now moving on, we have review the themes. Now remember, we had 3 themes for each books. We can review them now and say if it's actually valid or not. Now for Women at Point Zero, we have pervasive sexism and oppression, which is clearly proven throughout the whole book, throughout all of Ferdius's examples, and unfortunately Men Explain Things to Me prove that this is still happening today. Also fear and survival, in which Ferdius, when she was at her lowest point, a woman actually helped her, which relates once again to self-worth and ownership, also taught by a woman. Now we also have from Men Explain Things to Me, issues of credibility. Now this is basically society's refusal to ascribe it to women. We also have the silencing and disappearing of women as a form of violence, in which she gives a lot of examples about the rapes, such as the one stated in the first slide, and also the relationship between classism and sexism, which is shown throughout both books completely. It's been half a century and very little has changed. Something really does have to be changed, and impact is really needed. Now we see here, it is not yet a sustainable world. Each a major issue can be solved if one unites, if one does whatever one is needed to do. In this regard, in this case, we have Women at Point Zero and we have Men Explain Things to Me. Those books both expressing how women need help fight by more than just women. Everybody has to unite in order to have true equality. And only once we do that will everything finally be, hopefully, a sustainable world. Now, basically this book, my apologies, these books are not really books that I would generally choose. I'm not really into the feminism sector. I'm more of a business-minded person. However, in this case, I decided to choose these books as I was uneducated. Now, I have to thank them very much, both Rebecca Solnit and Noel Saadawi, for both educating and inspiring me to do certain things. So I really do thank them for their careful consideration of words throughout these books. And thank you very much, sir, for your time and your effort and help throughout the whole semester. Thank you for my presentation. Thank you for listening to it. Have a great day.